Welcome to Breaking Point, a podcast from CAPC, the Center to Advance Palliative Care. In this limited series podcast, CAPC invites healthcare workers from across the country to share their eye-opening stories from the front lines of the pandemic. Listen as they give us an unfiltered look at their reactions to the demands they've encountered and the coping strategies they've employed as they reach their breaking point. Your host today is Dr. Andrew Esch.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Esch. Thank you for joining us this week on Breaking Point. Today, we're joined by Shawndra Ferrell, who's a nurse practitioner and the inpatient palliative care program lead at Advocate Trinity Hospital, which is based in Chicago, Illinois. Shawndra, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here on Breaking Point.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
Yeah, you bet. Shawndra, I got to tell a little bit of your story because I love it so much. You came to your first CAPC seminar in 2019 when we were in Atlanta, and I met you at an office hours table. And your story was so great. You're a new leader, new to palliative care, trying to get things up and running. And it just occurred to me, like 4 months after I met you is when the bottom fell out of healthcare and the pandemic hit. What has that been like for you? Like, this is
it was interesting.
Yeah. Tell me more. Like you're just figuring out your way, how to run your program, set it up, building those relationships, and then everything you had to have been starting to feel comfortable with change. So what's it been like in your position as trying to build something as the lead, as the solo practitioner in this chaotic time? To what's as best you can, what's it been like?
So leading up to, I would say the first year, of course, it's full of learning curves and, hurdles and, not so much obstacles as much as they are, points to move around and say, hey, can we do this differently? Because I'm new and, what can we do to make this program kind of, mold into the culture that already exists? And we were doing such a good job of doing that around here. I felt very embedded, not just professionally, but personally, because this hospital it's a small community hospital in a large organization. So we have about 200 plus beds, and it's not hard to become much like family. And so the first year, again, learning curves, but it was good. We were moving right along. Consults they expected that it would take time to build the program. And I think that was one of the things that I shared at the CAPC conference, was that instead of it building slowly, even though it's in a predominantly minority community, there wasn't a lot of time to build buy-in. I hit the ground running right out the gate. And so the physicians, the teams that were here, they were excited to have palliative care. So it wasn't even a slow start. And then COVID hit. And so when COVID came, we were already kind of moving in a way that helped, me as a solo provider, but also help them understand how to best utilize the one person that you have. What's the most important thing you can get out of having palliative care on site. And when COVID came, we struggled like most organizations would, to figure out, again, how do we best use Shawndra because she's all we have. But pretty quickly, the organization set in place much of what other organizations did. They pulled in retired palliative care docs, and they pulled in palliative social workers and palliative chaplains from other sites that we could share amongst ourselves. Our own teams kind of jumped in to make sure that they supported us. And so I had the internal systems that were already working, and then for lack of a better word, it's that concept of being alone, but not lonely. So I always had all of our systems that were all palliative across all sites, but then being able to pull on, even our pediatric palliative care team, they jumped in to help, whether it was by telephone visits or teleconference, telehealth. Everybody pitched in. And so it was a struggle to meet the needs of the hospital on a lot of days because you couldn't always keep up. There was this interesting feeling of being glad that there was help, but also not wanting to burn out the help. So it was difficult to try to process how much do you use the help and how much do you say, never mind, I'll take it all because it's my site. There was some part of that ownership thing that made it hard for me to give it to someone else. But sometimes you just had to say, I can't do it all. So I was glad to have the help.
You mentioned being alone, but not being lonely. One of the things we've heard on a lot of these Breaking Point podcasts is that palliative care teams really leaned on each other to get through this. And you didn't have a team per se. I mean, I know you're part of a bigger system with a lot of palliative care. How did you navigate that? Like, how did you feel supported?
I actually had to make. I think it took me a while to figure that out. But essentially, the relationships I spent that first year building, I had to make them deeper, for lack of a better word. I had to pull in the people who had a lot of palliative care interest before. So a lot of nurses and techs and even some of the other APCs in our hospital, people who had a lot of interest. I kind of started tagging them in more to patients that we shared. So instead of just reading each other's notes, we became very hands-on, I sent you a message, hey, can you call me? Because it seemed more supportive to talk about these things than it was to send a lot of messages. The nurses on the floors, quite a few of them had a lot more questions than they usually did. So I got asked a lot, when you go into that room, what are you going to say? What are you going to do that's different from everybody else? So interestingly enough, it allowed me to start doing there was a lot of teaching opportunities because people wanted to know more about what made what I was doing any different than the conversations that everybody else was already having. And so basically, not letting that moment to teach pass me by and understanding that every person I took the time to talk to could potentially be, a facilitator in my conversations, and then after I've met with patients or families, coming back and saying, this is what happened in the meeting. When you go in and talk to them next time, can you ask, can you say, can you make sure you put these conversation pieces in your notes, things like that. And interestingly enough, I've seen for the people who are still part of the process, I've seen a lot of that behavior stay. So I've seen certain nurses, still charting a certain kind of way or understanding the power of those conversations and having them come back and say that it really mattered that they understood more about, why asking people about what their goals are and not just following orders as they thought they were supposed to.
What was it like at your hospital? Were you seeing a lot of turnover? You mentioned that because you're a small, more community-minded hospital, that you were like a family. Mm-hmm. Has to be hard seeing what you must have seen. There must have been members of your family that really had a hard time with this. What was that like for you, and how did you navigate that?
It was difficult. We had staff who, of course, were positive. Some were very, very ill and thankfully recovered. Of course, we had a few who, were very ill and did not recover. So loss was difficult. Trying to find ways to keep each other encouraged was sometimes very difficult. Thankfully, I had such a positive relationship with the people that I was working with, and just, being who I was here in the hospital, it was easier to say, hey, you don't look good today. Can we take a walk down the hallway? Let's talk. Even when people were busy, I know we were supposed to keep some distance, but just linking arms and saying, hey, we're going to walk down the hallway and we're going to walk back. and let's just take a minute to take a break. Kind of giving each other not just permission, but it was kind of encouraged inside of our hospital to share your feelings, not just share your feelings, but actually show your feelings, because tucking it in wasn't working. Everybody was trying to figure out a way to how to keep pushing, but it didn't always work when you just keep pushing. Sometimes you do need to stop and take a break. And so that's what we did. Everybody figured out a way to, some of the nurses would do the same for me. I've seen you up here 5 times. Did you eat lunch? And usually the answer was no. And so they would have food and snacks and treats on the floor. And I was always invited to be able to participate no matter what. So that was always helpful. People saying, walk me through what it is you're doing. Why are you back on this floor? What can I do to help you? That was something that was helpful. The same thing for me. If I already knew I was going into a room, I'd stop at the nurse's desk and is there something I can take in for you? Were you going in the next few minutes? Can I take that with me? Is this the tray for this patient? Can I take the tray? Is it okay if they feed themselves? So we really had to be not just a hospital team, where these are the docs and these are the specialists and everybody became one part of one team. That it had to move like that or it was never going to work.
Thanks for sharing that. I think we've heard, words like resiliency and things like, team health and all those sort of buzzwords. They took on a different meaning during COVID. What made you able to keep going? Like where did you find joy? What did you do that made what must have felt like Groundhog Day tolerable these last couple of years?
Initially, it was difficult to find joy anywhere, even at home. I'm sure that, much like everybody else's family, of course, there's a lot of opinions at home, I have family members who are in healthcare. I have family members who are not. So you have the stuff that was at home, you had the things that were social media, and then you had work, and where there were also a lot of opinions. And so joy was an interesting concept, but it was difficult to actually grab hold of. But interestingly enough, we had things going on in my family and in my life that were things you could find joyful. I had a daughter that was graduating college. I graduated with a higher degree. At the office site, one of the best things is that we're a faith-based organization, and throughout the day, the head chaplain comes on and she reads encouraging words or poems or prayer or scripture. And I remember I used to just kind of listen to it, and because you're listening to it, you kind of tune it out over time. But during COVID, at some point, it became a stopping point. I remembered that I would open my door so I could specifically hear it, in my office. And when I would be on the floors, I used it as an excuse to just stop and be still. So no matter where I was or what I was doing, unless I was in a patient's room, when it came on, it was my excuse to just stop and take a beat. And that kind of helped me, decide, okay, where was I going? What was I doing? Am I really ready to do that? If I was going into a patient's room, am I really ready for that? Or do I need a few more minutes? That helped me to kind of recenter myself and to say, it's okay to think about me, even if it's just for a few minutes throughout the day, not a few minutes a day, but a few minutes several times a day. Just stop and be still and check in with myself. The other thing is I'm a little goofy, and I think that that's okay. And so I found ways to be respectfully playful. And so, the thing about me missing lunch, everybody knew I did. And so I had a habit of asking people, well, what's in your pocket? And sometimes people had a pack of peanuts or some candy or something like that. And so over the first year I was here, I got into the habit of asking people for pocket candy, or pocket snacks. And so I continued to do that even through COVID. And so there were certain people that would carry snacks in their pockets, knowing that if they ran into me, I'm gonna ask for whatever's in your pocket. So people thought it was funny. And then again, just the goofy things you could do. Like I made a joke about exercising my eyebrows, because with all the stuff we had on, all patients saw was this. And I said, I probably have the strongest eyebrows I've ever had in my life, because I'm constantly raising them up and trying to find ways to move them so the patient knows I'm still listening, I'm still engaged. And people thought that was hilarious. So, we ran around doing things like that. Interestingly enough, we also felt a little guilty sometimes. And that was the not so fun part of it, because if you were laughing in the hallways, you didn't always feel like you should be laughing, that was hard, but we gave each other permission to, try to find ways to be joyful and to smile anyway, find humor where you could.
Yeah. It's hard to, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to be, happy in a moment when there's so much suffering going on around you. I appreciate that a lot. What do you think in your role as a new leader? What are you most proud of, or what would you share with the listeners? Like something you did that was like a real success, or something your health system did that was a real success that helped get you through, and is still helping you get through, because we're not through this yet. This time we're in.
I think that they do a really excellent job now of constantly communicating. It can never be overkill at this point, right? But we are constantly being reminded, whether it's the overhead or the posters or the emails that they send out, about self-care and mental health, and being healthcare providers who struggle with mental health or who think you might be struggling, and making that okay, so that there's no punishment, there's no repercussions, that it's okay to reach for help. The constantly being told, go check in with yourself, take a PTO day, take a break, take a mental health day, do whatever you have to do to make sure that when you are here, you're fully here, and that you're well, or, as well as you can be. And that you don't have to be afraid to say, I'm not okay, and I think that for me, that aligns with what you've seen, kind of across healthcare. People just admitting that, the doctors, the nurses, the nurse practitioners, the techs, nobody is quite okay right now. I kind of developed a habit over a few months about when people would say, well, hey, how are you? And my first answer would be tired, and we kind of laughed about it because they would say the same thing to me. And I felt sad, because I felt like, well, I don't know when the next time is that I won't feel tired, and we're not talking about you are off the weekend, so you're less tired. We mean tired on the inside, in a way that's different from maybe people who don't work in healthcare, and not to minimize other, other jobs or other specialties or other career choices and such, and, in the world. But I just mean from a particular perspective, if you don't work directly in healthcare, there's certain things you're not privy to seeing every day, or conversations you're not having every day. And so having us as an organization align with the direction that healthcare was moving in, that said, it is okay to not be okay. And if you're not okay, tell somebody. That was such a learning curve for me, because I was very used to keeping whatever was going on with me, because the rule was you don't bring your issues to work. But it was basically being encouraged that if you had to bring it to work, bring it to work, talk to somebody, share with the people you can trust that you're not okay. So that's the one takeaway, is from this point forward, it's okay, even at work, to say you're not okay.
Yeah, there's been a lot exposed about the healthcare system during COVID. But there has been some silver linings, and I think that's one of them, is that when we're really sick, the culture used to be, well, you go to work, right? Like you don't take a day off. Like if you're not up to it, you go. Well, now, I mean, there's a recognition that that's changed. When I think about the future, Shawndra, you mentioned how exhausted you are. I mean, to me, that's like just such a grief response that we're all feeling right now. Like we're just going on muscle memory and adrenaline and just commitment to the profession. But even now, as cases are sort of trending down nationally, we have time to think about how tired we are, right? So this is a really challenging time for us, where the volume and everything is going to sort of settle down, at least for a little while here. But then we got to deal with what it's done to us the last 2 years. What do you think about, as you move forward from this point on, as to how you've changed or how you'll change practicing and being the professional that you are, given your experience through this time that we're going through?
I think I give myself permission to pause and take a step back. Before, if things didn't, it felt sometimes like in palliative care, we get consulted so much on the really hard, conversations. We all know that, earlier referrals, lead to certain outcomes. And, we have these expectations, the research shows it. However, we're not always referred early. And sometimes it's late enough that, the families and the people we're talking to are wondering if who you are and what you bring is so great, then where have you been all this time? So it becomes kind of an issue of trust. And so I've given myself permission to say it's okay if nothing moves the first time, or if nothing moves the second time, or if I met with that family and I gave it my best and nothing moved the next time, because it's not always about us getting them to move, right? I heard it said that it's our job to help them see a need to move in a direction that helps them meet the goal. And so when you take the weight off of yourself, as a provider, the lesson for me is, it's okay if the only thing I got out of it was that they're solid in their goal. They understand exactly what everyone's been saying, and they're not changing their minds. We just stay the course and just asking, how can I help you from this point on? And that's a big takeaway, because so often the pressure felt like we're supposed to change something, when the truth is, our job is to get to the truth. And part of our job of getting to the truth is making sure they know everything they need to know to make a good decision. And once they know that, it's not my job to change their minds. It's okay if nothing moves.
It's so true. I mean, when you get these consults for code status, there's like an implied order in there, like, you better get the DNR, right? Like, we're calling you in, you better make them DNR. And I would have to say all the time, well, full code is a status. We established it. We had a good conversation, and that's what they want, right? But I do think COVID has allowed palliative care to be seen much broader than the code status service or the advanced care planning service, right? Like, I think our value has been shown, because at least at the beginning of the pandemic, these were our patients. These were, a lot of them were older, a lot of comorbidities. So during all this, during everything, your first and second year of running a program, a once in 100-year pandemic hitting, you found time to put together a poster and present at the CAPC 2x4. Talk to me a little bit about that, and is that work still going on?
I did. My doctoral project was on advanced care planning in the African American church. And that was actually born out of building this program the first few months that I was here. The project started off as something completely different, which was going to be about how to build a palliative care program, period. But since I hit the ground running, building it was not my problem. Getting it started wasn't the problem. What I ran into was that, patients who had what they considered maybe barriers of faith, or the healthcare workers thought the barrier was the people's faith. And finding out how do I get not necessarily around it, but how do I walk through it with the patient? And so essentially I started bringing their faith leaders into the conversations. Of course, this was pre-COVID, and bringing them here. As long as the family agreed and the patients agreed, I asked them, do you want to include your faith leaders in these conversations? And they were so grateful to be asked. And when the faith leaders were done with the conversations and the meetings, very often I got asked, do you do this in the community? Where can we get these teachings? And at some point I thought it was not good enough to say, I don't know if it's in the community, or I don't think it does exist, and so I used my project for school in order to build a project based on the IHI's Conversation Ready and the Conversation Project. And I used a church here in Trinity's service area, and it had really good outcomes. I'm grateful for the experience, and I'm excited to see that when you have a customizable, easily used tool that can be reproduced, in small form or large form, that faith organizations really, they can be very useful, as they always have been, with moving issues of health in the population. And so that has continued as much as I could here in Trinity. So even if it's via a conference call, a video call, with some of the restrictions being lifted, sometimes you can bring people in. I've continued to ask patients, do you have a faith leader who you'd like to be part of these conversations? That's gone well. And I do have a few faith leaders in the community who are interested and who have heard about the project. Most of the barriers that I have now are much like most people, which is, people want to be together. And the question is, how do we do that safely? If you're going to learn really important, really serious information, most people want to be together when they do it. And so it's just getting around that. But otherwise, the work continues.
I just want to thank you so much for being on Breaking Point today. When I met you in Atlanta, I remember saying to our CEO, Bryn Bowman, you are the future of the field. And as I enter the back end of my career, I feel like the field's in such good hands with just young, thoughtful, new to the field people that are bringing fresh ideas and being innovative in a time where it's been incredibly challenging. So thank you for being on this. Thank you for doing the work you do. And gotta be nice to see each other in person again, right?
Exactly. I'm very excited for the time to come when CAPC can meet again as a group, and when conferences are in person and we can move around safely. But thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
I still
absolutely.
remember us too from that very first after hours. And so I'm very grateful to CAPC and the toolkit and all the things that are easily accessible, for people who are not members. And so I'm very grateful to have been invited. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Shawndra. We'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening today. For debriefings, the Emotional PPE Toolkit, and more, visit capc.org/COVID-19.